Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about Spring. I'll go into more detail later, but what I wanted, the point of this lecture is to show you how to set up a Spring app in Visual Studio Code. So Spring is a framework basically, right? So it's a Spring, the Spring ecosystem has a bunch of different Java applications that we can incorporate into our web development for Java. Okay. We are going to focus on the Spring Boot, right? Spring Boot is kind of the starting point for developing Spring applications, but there's a ton of different aspects to Spring. There's Spring Data, there's Spring MVC, Spring Cloud. There's all kinds of, the Spring ecosystem is basically the most popular and sort of the de facto framework for making web applications in Java. Okay, so we're going to learn Spring by focusing on the Spring Boot aspect of it. Okay, so to make a Spring Boot application, you're going to, why do I have two of these open? Oh, that's right. I'll close this one. So the first thing you need to do is there's a couple of extensions you need to install. Okay, so go to the extensions tab and you're going to search for Spring. Okay. If you install the Spring Boot extension pack, it will install the first three. Okay, so just go search for Spring. The Spring Boot extension pack is all you need to install because these others will be installed when you install this. So click it. Obviously, I have it installed, but you're just going to install it. Should be pretty quick. Okay. Anybody having trouble finding it? Just in case, I just want to pause a minute just in case you guys are following along with me. Okay, so once you do that, close this up. You are going to go to the command palette. So to get to the command palette, it's Control Shift and P. And mine is right here, but yours probably won't come up right away. So if you just type in Spring, you should see Spring Initializer create a Maven project. I don't think it'll give you the Gradle option. So you should see this when you type in Spring. Okay, so I'm going to click it. The Spring version, I'm afraid to use the newest one. If it breaks, it breaks. Let's try to use the newest one. We'll do 3.1.5. We're going to select Java, right? We're not doing Kotlin or Groovy. We're going to use Java. This is where we create our package name. If you want to keep it simple, you could just, that's fine, right? That could be your package name. I'm going to be consistent so I don't get confused. I'm just going to use my reverse domain name, co.tylermac, if I can spell my own name. Okay. Then once you type your package name or group ID, this will be the assignment. Okay, so where it says demo, that's where you're going to type in Daikachi routes or Dojos and Ninjas or Hopper receipt, whatever the assignment is, that's what you're going to type in here. So I'm just going to, this is just for me going to be Spring demo. And they're very particular about what you can put in here. I think it's only Spring, lowercase letters, and dashes. Okay. So once I've named my project, I'm going to hit enter. It gives you the option of either a jar or a WAR file. Jar, we didn't really talk about. Jar means Java archive. WAR means web archive. There's also an EAR, which I can't remember what that is, but either one's fine. Jar, WAR, the picking a jar file is fine because it's going to be packaged, and Spring is going to use a web server that's incorporated into Spring. So jar is fine. Just select jar. You want to select your Java version. So hopefully everybody's using 17. If you're using something lower than 17, it's not going to work on the newest version of Spring. So select 17. I'm going to, this is where we select our dependencies. So I'm just going to do Spring Web. Okay, so there's a lot here. So if you just type web, it should come up, it should reduce the number of choices, and you want to select Spring Web. Okay. I'm going to do the dev tools too. So let's do Spring, let's just do dev, and we want to incorporate the Spring dev tools as well. Okay. We're going to be adding more dependencies as we go forward, but for now, those two are all we need for starters is Spring Web and Spring Boot DevTools. Okay. Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Okay. Am I too slow? Just right? I'm looking for Goldilocks. Yeah, she's got to have good port. She breaks into people's houses, but she's got to have good port. Anyway. All right. It's going to ask me where I want to put it. Okay. So I'm in my Java November 23. If you're in Java assignments or whatever, I'm going to put it where you guys can find it. All the code that I write during lectures in this code file. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to put it in day 4. Okay. So I'm going to generate it into this folder. It's going to create the Spring Boot application. It's going to ask me if I want to open it in a new window. I do. And you should too, because it's going to make your life easier, right? So I'm going to click open. It's going to open my Spring Boot application in a new window. Close this one. Okay. So what you should see is the title of the application you made, and then you should see all of these files in the root. Okay, so if you have another file, if it says Spring Demo or Spring whatever, and then there's another file, you're not in the right place. Okay, so as long as this is your root, everything will work out. Just click Enable, just select all the defaults for those windows that pop up. Okay, let me try to zoom out. There we go. So you should see, if you've installed the extension, you should see this little Spring Boot icon. Okay. You see that Spring Boot icon, you click that, and then it'll give you you can click either this run button or you can hover over the app, click this run button, either one's fine. So I'm going to click this one. And it's going, this is Maven basically gathering all the dependencies that are needed. I already have them, so it went really fast for me. It might take yours a little longer. When you see the terminal and it looks like this, what does that tell you? It's probably the third time you guys have seen this. So what does that mean when there's no prompt here?
Is it waiting for us to enter something?
Yeah, it's a loop, right? There's something running, right? Something is happening. And in our case, it's a web server. Tomcat is running on a port waiting for input. So I think it shows you here. It might not. Okay, so what's happening is basically I have a Spring application running on my computer, right? So if I go to a web browser, by the way, I have this bookmark localhost where I have all the localhost, the localhost ports that I use, and it's a game changer. I feel like a new man once I started doing this. So you don't have to type in localhost every time. So I have a bookmark for localhost 8080. That's the port that Tomcat runs on. So if I click that and you see this, it means it's working. Okay. Let me pause here for questions. Anybody having trouble? Nobody's having trouble? It's working? Okay. I'm going to take credit for this. I think it's my teaching.
Wait, mine's still running.
Okay. I know it's too good to be true. No, that's fine though. I'm just playing with you. Let me stop sharing. And I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, so this kind of is boring, right? We want to make this do something more interesting. So I'm going to go back to my application.
I
Go
think
back.
you need to share.
I do. That would help. Thank you. I do that once a class. I'll start pointing at stuff and talking about stuff, and I'm not sharing my screen. So thank you. Okay, now you guys see my screen, right? Yeah. All right, so this is what I was talking about. This is why I was doing that demonstration with the Maven application. This file structure is a little wonky, right? It's a little weird. So just before we get into the meat of it, the pom.xml, this is what I was showing you before. This is where we're going to include all of our dependencies. So when I first started the application, I included the dev tools. So Visual Studio Code automatically added that dependency for me. The Spring Starter, that's good. I think that's for test. Yeah, Spring Test, and then the Spring Web. So this is automatically included when you create a Spring Boot application. The dev tools is what I added, and then I also added the Spring Web, which allowed me to have a web application running. Okay. We're going to be adding to this dependency list as we go along. It's going to be, I don't know, like maybe 50, 100 lines long by the time we get to the end of it. So notice how the document's structured. Does anybody know what this is called? What this kind of looks like HTML, right? Anybody know the name for this format, or what is it? Scripting? Flea market? Flea market HTML? Close. So it's XML, which stands for extensible markup language, I think. So it's just kind of a way to document code, right? So notice we have, let me zoom in a little bit. We have opening and closing tags. So the group ID, all this stuff is just documentation that Maven sets up for me. I didn't write this. It made the description for me. That was kind of cool. So notice that there's dependencies and then individual dependency, plural, inside of dependencies, right? So if I wanted to add another dependency, I would say dependency, right? And I would include the data for my dependency in here. You don't have to write it by hand. You can copy and paste it, but whoops. Just be careful when you're inserting dependencies. Make sure that you don't put them inside of another dependency. Make sure that you kind of have to keep track of your formatting. Make sure you don't put them in the wrong place. All right.
I got a quick question.
Sure.
I see you have like on 28 and 29 right to the scope runtime. I don't have that. And I'm pretty sure I've followed you step by step. So what does that do, and is it not good if I don't have it?
So the scope has to do with whether it's a testing, development, runtime, compile time. So I don't think it shouldn't be a big deal. I think it's by default runtime, right? Vincent, do you know? Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, as long as basically the way I go about it is if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? So if your application's running, it's not, it'll probably just format things differently. It's not that big of a deal. All right, any other questions? Okay. All right. So the code that we're going to write, or anything modifications we're going to make, is going to be in the SRC. So you've opened up SRC, there's main, there's Java, and then this is the root of our application. So notice that we have our public static void main. Notice the annotations here. Okay, so the annotations are a significant part of Spring Boot. Annotations, the only annotation we've seen so far is the override annotation, but it's possible to create your own annotations that modify the way a program works. And that's essentially how Spring Boot and Spring works. It has built-in annotations that we're going to use to tell Spring what we're making. Okay, so Spring does this automatically. There's only one Spring Boot application, and it basically creates a demo app is what I called it. So that's what it named the class. And then this is the entry point for our application. This is our public static void main, like we've been doing all along. That has to be there in order for a Java application to work. Okay. Then it uses an internal run method, and then it just runs the application, right? So as soon as I click, there's another way to do it that I'll show you in another time, but as soon as I click the play button, it executes this method for me. Okay. So if I want to have something show up on the screen, if I want to start building a web application, I need what's called a controller. Okay, so way back in Python, you talked about the MVC framework, right? You guys remember that? Sound a little bit familiar? So the entry point is a controller. So inside of the Spring Demo, on the same level as the Spring Demo application class, I'm going to make another class called Demo Controller.java. Okay. Now I need to tell Spring what this is. So there's a couple of annotations you're just going to have to memorize or learn or put in your notes somewhere. This is going to be a REST controller. Okay. And REST stands for representational state transfer. It's a mouthful. We'll talk more about REST as we go along, but basically this will allow me to just return raw data to the browser. So I'm going to make a route. So a route is just a function. So I'm going to say public string index, and I'm going to return okay. So just like we did in Flask, you need to annotate the method so that Spring knows what to do with it. Okay, so in Flask, you have the @app, right? .route, I think, if my memory serves right. So in Spring, it's not quite the same as Python. It's not a decorator, it's an annotation. So the annotation to have a route is, I'm totally blanking. Vincent, do you remember what it is?
Request mapping.
Thank you. Request mapping. And I'm going to have it go to /. So now when I go to my application, I hope this works. Okay.
Mine threw an error. It says request mapping cannot be resolved as a type.
Let me see what you got. And I'll pause